What is the truth? And how bad do you want to know?
Hey everyone, I'm Diana Davison, also known as Feminism LOL, and I'm sitting here today with Mr. John the Other.
Obviously.
And the reason for that, and also my being a day late uploading, is because I wanted to address Laci Green having made an announcement that she's going to start engaging in not debate, but dialogue with anti-feminists.
Soon, I'm going to be launching a series of live debates with feminists and anti-feminists.
And due to close proximity, John had to listen to Laci's voice for hours and hours as I was doing research. But the ensuing discussion was really interesting, so interesting, in fact, we decided to wait until today and record our thoughts on Laci's announcement and where we think it may or may not work out. So here we go. All right, so question number one, John, can anything good come of this?
I don't know that it's can anything good come of this. Is anything good going to come of this? Not if we proceed as the material we've seen up to this point.
People are asking about this. Is she going to be honest? Does she legitimately want to have a conversation? And they're speculating. And you don't really have to, because she's already done like a 2.4 hour discussion with Blair White.
You may have noticed that I've been talking to and hanging out with some anti-feminist YouTubers.
So there's material there that we can look at to determine what's going to happen on these future discussions, right?
Well, yeah, if we go forward with these conversations being the same as that one, which was really not an open and honest conversation as much as it was a condescending lecture.
We'll get there, Blair.
Right. So I am taking a optimistic point of view in terms of analyzing the material, and overall, from the discussions we've had so far, you're taking a more pessimistic point of view.
Yeah, I'm not defeatist. I just think there's some problems to be overcome.
There's very specific ones, so we'll go through them. Basically, not to say that these conversations shouldn't happen. My answer to that original question is, I am constantly saying that feminists and anti-feminists need to sit down and talk to each other and get some level of communication. And so I think that this is actually a good step. Whether it's Laci Green or somebody else, it should start somewhere. So I'm actually quite keen to see this happen. I'd just like to see it be productive.
As much as I saw some problems from Laci's side, Blair White let an awful lot of stuff slide. Might have been more productive if she'd pointed out the problems as they came, assuming that she could see them.
Right. So, well, that's one of the questions that I had here is the platform and whether or not it needs a moderator. So in terms of platform, I think Laci Green has a really big channel with 1.4 million subscribers currently, whether it seems to be growing actually since she's made this announcement. So she's got a really good platform. I think hosting it on her channel would be really good. But from what we've seen, do they require a moderator, somebody who's not just us trusting Laci Green to say that this is being done as the most reasonable feminist in the universe? Is she, and where are the problems with the nature of the dialogue? You said condescending, and that's definitely evident in her Blair White discussion from the very beginning, with the pen clicking and everything.
Why do you think that is?
Yeah, the other thing is that Laci makes a lot of direct as well as implied assertions that she's a science girl and that we know the following things, referring to, I guess, to various fields of academic study, but including herself in the group of implied experts. And I'm not sure that's correct. I'd like to see, a resume.
We have so much research about how people's behavior is shaped.
Yeah, and it was really interesting because she asserts at the very beginning that a lot of feminists will disagree with her. There's many kinds of feminisms, and so she's there representing Laci Green. She's not representing feminism as an entity or as a whole.
I'm not a spokesperson for feminism. All right, I'm not here to speak on behalf of feminists, on behalf of feminism, on behalf of any particular ideology. I'm here to speak for me. This is for me only. All right, it's me and Blair, not grand ideologies.
And yet every time she appeals to authority, she says, well, what we know, and every single time is what we know.
It's a little slip.
But there are some things that we do understand, right? And capture the nuance here.
Actually, it's not every single time, because another thing that she does is she says, well, I have people contacting me all the time, right? So we'll get to that one. But the first problem, as you've named, is appeal to authority. And so let's talk about what she did in terms of that type of fallacy.
I think there's some room to work with Laci here, because remember, she's kind of going back to her roots and claiming to be a member of the skeptic community. And the skeptic community, when it formed, when Laci was a part of it, was really going up against fundamentalist religionists and developed a keen awareness of a set of logical fallacies, many of which Laci employed. But shouldn't be that hard for her to just remember that it's not only when the other side uses them that they're bad.
Right. Well, you mentioned that we thought that Blair White dropped the ball a little bit here, and I'm taking an optimistic point of view, and I want to give credit to both sides in terms of how this went down, because it was a prototype. I think there was some discussion in advance in which Blair felt that they were actually just going to have a buddy-buddy kind of discussion, and so she didn't seem to be all that prepared in terms of her material. So, for example, she brought up a video that Laci had done, and she said there was a guy on there who you said was guilty of sexual assault, and it had all just been announced on social media, like Tumblr. And Laci said, "No, I don't really know who you mean. I've never done that. I would never do that." And then she was just like, "I've only talked about this one guy, Sam Pepper, and Toby Turner." And Blair's like, "Oh yeah, I think it was Toby Turner." And she goes, "No, that's not what happened. This person reported to police." But no, when you look up the Toby Turner event, it did start on Tumblr. It was repeated through social media over and over again. And there were a number of social media people, including some of Toby's ex-girlfriends, who came out in support of him, who knew both people. This was not an issue if somebody had gone to the police and anything had been proven in any way, shape, or form. And yes, Laci did a video accusing Toby of being a rapist. So in terms of that, and I'm not actually interested in discussing the content, I'm looking only at the tactics employed. So Laci is sitting there asserting to Blair that what Blair's saying is not accurate, when in fact it was.
Was that the one in the thumbnail? Do you remember?
I have talked about Sam Pepper had a lawsuit against him. Yeah, and I talked about that. I also talked about Toby Turner. I don't think I've talked about it.
It was whichever one in which the accusations solely came from Tumblr. It was literally a Tumblr post accusing
neither came from Tumblr. Both were actually court cases. They were reported to the police. Both of those cases had actual legal fallout.
So
yeah, and it's a stopper of the conversation. It's unless Blair is prepared to directly accuse Laci of dishonesty at that point, which is another way of stopping the conversation, then that conversation can't go forward. So there's a problem. If we're going to have these discussions, if there's going to be dialogue between these opposing sides, the feminist and the anti-feminist side, it has to be built on honest discussion, because otherwise we're all wasting our time.
Yeah, well, it's something to be learned for people who are hoping to go onto the show or who are invited onto the show, is be pre-warned that if you go on there just generically talking about something that has been said before, make sure you write down the note and know for sure who it is. So instead of Blair saying, "Was it Toby Turner?" you should know who this person is. And if you're met with this blanket denial of the truth, then you actually have it written down. You're not questioning yourself. Because, it was quite amazing, actually, that she made Blair question her own knowledge after Blair had obviously gone out and looked these things up. So be ready for that. Be ready for Laci to say, "No, that's not true," when in fact it's true.
Or whoever else becomes the most reasonable feminist in the world.
Right. And maybe they'll get group conversations going on this. I don't know. It would be nice, actually, to see more than one feminist willing to engage in conversation. But in terms of looking at this Blair White video to look at tactics and potential problems or things for people to be aware of going in, there were two subjects that came up, which Blair should be seen as somewhat of an expert on, because they have to do with Blair being a transsexual person herself, right, transgender, that you would think Laci would grant her a little bit of authority on some of these issues.
Well, I mean, also, it's her peer group. It's like the transsexual community is Blair's peer group, and Blair, whether she wants to or not, is a representative of that community.
Well, and she's somebody who has her own experiences of a bunch of things Laci doesn't, and that is having started out as male and it could work the other direction from female to male, but she started out as one gender and then taken hormones and treatments and transitioned from one gender to another in characteristics, and knows how, and this came up in the discussion, is talking about the actual emotional effects and changes and all the different things that took place. And so this became an appeal to popularity, because she said, you're one person, Blair White, and I get emails and conversations that have taken place between me and thousands of other people. Therefore, it's you versus thousands, and you lose.
What experience do you have with this, though? Like, I've traveled the world talking about this stuff. Like, where is it? Just like you're talking about the media, like a couple of friends?
No. I was a victim at 18. I was a victim at 18.
Okay, that's fine. But like, you're talking about anecdotes.
Aside from being dismissive, it's not honest. It's not an honest approach to the topic. I can't think of any actual part of the whole conversation, the 2.5 hours that they had, that Laci actually conceded any point at all.
Well, no, in terms of that specific issue, what she ended up saying is, if you continue to assert what you believe to be true, then you are basically telling all these other people, fuck you. And she basically said you're being a horrible person because you're harming these other individuals who have their own lived experience.
This is actually a really interesting point to examine. She did, in fact, say, I don't know if she said fuck you, she said screw you, or something like that. It's like something condemning and crushing of the group of people who they were talking about. And Laci attributed that crushing statement to Blair, although Blair had not made any such statement.
Doesn't fully account for it. Oh, there's two genders, and like, if you have intersex traits, go fuck yourself, figure it out for yourself, right?
That's not what I'm saying either, though. I mean, I don't think that
So what is it?
Now, I don't care about that statement in its particular, but I do note that this is a habitual rhetorical tactic. That if you say something that's in disagreement with the feminist point of view, it's not just that you disagree. That your disagreement is reframed as much more than disagreement, but condemnation or dehumanization of whatever group you're talking about, even though you are in no way dehumanizing them. And then, of course, because you've dehumanized them, according to them, you're now a terrible, horrible person, and everything you say can be discounted. This is, in fact, such a habitual practice that I wonder if the feminists are even aware that they're doing it, or if it's just become like their cultural reflex to do that.
Well, it's part of the intersectional approach in which it's very postmodernist. So what they're trying to do is say that I want to validate your reality, but you need to validate everybody else's reality, which is interesting when she's coming at this. Laci is coming at this as saying, I'm a skeptic and I like science. So at the same time, she's saying that the reality of the world must take into account multiple people's points of view. In terms of the actual moment where she says, oh, you're just saying fuck you, that particular issue was about intersex. So the argument at the time was Blair is saying there's only two genders. Laci's saying, rather hyperbolically and laughing at herself, no, there's 9,000. And then she's saying, well, there's intersex people. Therefore, you can't be right with two genders because intersex people are then left out, and you're essentially saying, fuck you.
Blair's position is that is a deformity or an anomaly, let's be kind and not put too much of a pejorative on it, rather than saying, which I think is Laci's point of view, that because there is a small number of people who are not in the bimodal distribution of sexual characteristics, therefore there is no such thing as the bimodal distribution, that there is an infinite array of genders, right?
Right.
And to disagree with that is not just to disagree, but to degrade and dehumanize the people who fall within that little tiny sliver. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really dishonest and unkind to do that.
And again, we're not arguing about whether or not there's two genders or 9,000. What we're doing is looking at tactics used in this conversation. And like you said, it's the tactics that are being used either consciously or unconsciously. I'm prone to think that they're a little bit unconscious.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I'm sure there are very nasty-minded people who do this on purpose with complete clarity of thought, but it's so common in the feminist rhetorical world that I think it's become habitual and is not even noticed among them when they do it.
Yeah, and the point of going through all of this stuff is to actually try to pick out these common techniques, these things that are go-tos that have been identified by anti-feminists a number of times, which are in a large part the reason why you said there's no point arguing with feminists, right? Because they have a certain mindset or they just keep using these tactics. So I think it'd be really good to develop a list of sort of rules or at least guidelines for people going onto the show, because really when you're engaged in this conversation or the discussion or debate, whatever it is you think you're going to be doing when you get there, these tricks get pulled, and it's usually not until you're watching it later where you kind of go, oh, okay, I see what just happened. In fact, there's some really great looks on Blair's face as you can see that she's annoyed, but she hasn't quite figured out what just happened or what it is that she's angry about.
I think for me, like in terms of it's a very narrow-minded way.
Yeah, at the same time though, we should probably say you don't want to just shout out the name of a logical fallacy when you see it, because that is also a terminator of the conversation. That's a straw man, and then what? The habit becomes to just shout out the names of logical fallacies, even sometimes when that's not the correct fallacy, and think that you're winning a rhetorical point. The goal here isn't to crush the other person, it's to have a productive conversation. So for Laci, I would say, remember, Laci, you claim to be a skeptic, and if you're a member of the skeptic community or even a former member, awareness and avoidance of the logical fallacies is part of the path of honesty. In the kindest way I can say, Laci's got to learn to police herself, or whoever becomes, the most reasonable feminist in the world.
Right. Well, and there was a lot of banter or words coming out of Laci's mouth saying, well, what I'm referring to is the dictionary that psychologists use. And so that it sort of gives you this impression that she's got some degree in psychology, which she may. I'm not aware of one. And then also she says, well, what we know about false accusations. And then she goes on to talk about how she's counseled, at least she's worked on at least 1,000 cases as a support person for survivors of sexual assault. And again, a language problem going into this. I'm one of the people who doesn't think that you should be using the word survivor or victim when you're looking at a case that hasn't actually been proven in a fact-finding arena like a courtroom.
Yeah, I had a real problem. In fact, I was shouting at my computer screen every time she said survivors, when what we're talking about is a person making a claim that is untested at that point in the conversation.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good sort of groundwork agreement thing that could be arranged too, is just like there's various aspects of rhetoric that are unhelpful to an actual conversation. And so you can be like, okay, maybe make a codicil at the beginning or something. It'd be like Laci could say, I'm going to refer to people as people who claim to have been assaulted. I think that you're survivors, but for the purpose of this conversation and out of respect for my colleague here, I won't be using that phrase. I still think you're survivors. She can do whatever she wants, but let's remove the rhetoric that's blocking conversation.
I know I'm going to belabor this point in saying so, but if you say survivor, you are foreclosing the possibility of actual skepticism. I mean, we go back to Laci claiming to be a skeptic. Everybody who says that they are a victim of, an offense they're not all telling the truth. And then that is not even to suggest that the ones who are not telling the truth are all lying. You can be wrong. You can think that you are a victim and be wrong. But if you say survivor, you're closing off any possibility of querying what happened in that circumstance. And you're just deciding we're going to skip from the accusation to the sentence and just never mind any evidentiary inquiry, which is really a problem if you're going to claim to be skeptic.
Actually, speaking about moments where you just wanted to scream at the TV, or actually did, there was a moment where an assertion was made by Ms. Laci Green that men who are accused of sexual assault can completely recover their lives, that their lives do not get damaged.
Oh, nothing happens to them. They're fine.
the example that she gave was some Brazilian football player, I think is actually soccer in terms of Canadian language, but a Brazilian football player who had his wife killed and tortured and killed, and then he got sentenced to a number of years in prison, got out early, and he was immediately hired by another football team. And so nothing happened. And of course, the problem with this story is...
There's several problems. One of them being that that's not a rape. That's not a sexual assault. Number two, in the rarefied world of Brazilian professional football, that's not the world that the rest of us are living and operating within. It's not even the same country. So, yeah, a little wonky there.
And we do have a similar case that's North American, which is O.J. Simpson, who was tried for murder and acquitted of murder. Nobody believes it, and he's not worked. So even that one singular story, if you take a similar story from North America, you don't find that fact to be scientifically correct.
Although he was even acquitted, didn't go to jail, that was the end of his public life. He was done, cooked, goodbye. And that too was not actually a sexual assault. That was another murder and dismemberment.
Yeah, but it's like this skeptical thing where you want to actually take same facts and put them next to each other.
Yeah.
So she branched off of actual sexual assault cases, and she chose a murder case. And you can say even just the average person on the street, if you ask them to think about a case where somebody murdered somebody and they were a sports star and what happened to their life, they're going to think of OJ. So I don't know how she comes to a conclusion,
That a
let
Brazilian
alone about rape,
football star,
but about even a murder, that somebody can commit an act like that and just carry on. They're still going to be a sports star and nothing ever happens to their life.
I would question something else, and I don't have any facts to back this up. I just have my own personal experience. Laci claims to have been an advocate for over 1,000, quote, survivors, including men, she says, or male students, I'm guessing, and then further asserts that there is no serious consequence to those who are falsely accused. Well, I know that that's not true. Not that she's not been an advocate for or a helper for 1,000 people, or even 1,000 male students, but to make the assertion that there's no long-term, life-altering negative consequence for somebody who's falsely accused is an outlandish and ridiculous statement that it's beyond my ability to describe with the most superlative language.
Well, and again, taking it back to this being a discussion about tactics that are employed in these so-called debates or discussions, that is a really big deal when you're talking about something and then assert yourself to be the expert on it, and then make these advocacy centered statements. So she is probably, I know she's been going around campuses. Again, you mentioned earlier, I'd like to see her resume, but she has been going around campuses helping to create these absurd sexual assault policies, which have resulted in multiple lawsuits. So well done, Laci, on that one. But she has obviously engaged in at least the tribunal process that takes place on universities. But from somebody who actually goes into court helping the falsely accused, the results of her work are that we get so-called victims or survivors up on a witness stand saying, I promise to tell the truth. And instead, the answer to the questions they're asked is a bunch of rhetoric. And it's the rhetoric that you hear on Laci Green's channel. Not to say she's single-handedly going around and doing this.
Not just her channel, but every feminist is spouting off the same rhetoric. And then, yeah, you're right. When you have somebody on the stand, when they're asked a question about the circumstances of their particular case, they will give a broad generalized statement saying, yes, will victims do this, that, and the other thing. We're not asking about victims in a courtroom or in an inquiry. We're asking about this particular person.
Right. And so, that's the kind of thing is like you have to be prepared for these advocacy statements, and then you have to pull it back into a neutral zone and say, okay, well, if you're actually there supporting and listening to this person, how come this person isn't getting up on the stand and talking about their experience? They're actually just repeating phrases. Like I actually in court heard a woman say, well, I didn't have sex, which is the reason we're all in the court. It's a claim of sexual assault. And she goes, no, I was raped. That's not the same as sex. So in what world is an advocate or support person being helpful to this person when they've got them to a point where they're going up on the stand and not even talking about the incident anymore. They're just spouting off what they read in the book or what the person whispered to them during the break.
Yeah, they're giving out rhetorical talking points instead of being specific about their own story. And I guess if you're oppositional to this point of view, that rhetoric, when you start seeing the talking points coming out in response to a specific personal question, then you know you're not being told the truth.
And that's really like in terms of, again, trying to keep focused and not getting sucked into, and that particular issue is one that's very personal to me. So I'm trying not to get sucked into just, negating what she said or creating some sort of an argument against something said in a month-old video. I'm just looking at like the various traps and the problems with this type of dialogue, which, not to say that as a result, Laci should not do any interviews or discussions with anti-feminists or that anti-feminists should not go on her show. The whole point is to say, as these go on, because I have no right to tell her not to do it, and I would expect she would go ahead anyways. And I think it may be a good thing, but if you're going to go on there, you have to study all of the various techniques.
But the point here isn't by the way, to go pwn a feminist, or if you're a feminist, to go pwn the other side. I think Laci has done something great, whether it was from career building intention or whether honest intention to have a conversation. I don't actually care about the motivation because the outcome is going to be the same no matter what. But for people going into these conversations, they have to be honest, and both sides have to be honest. Otherwise, it's not going to be any more productive than the Steve Shives technique of wall everybody off and don't talk to them.
Well, I think in the end, what I would like to see is that as a result of this discussion, we're not going to end up with the anti-feminist or anti-SJW sitting there at the end like Blair with a look like this on her face.